Welcome back, everybody. I'm Junia Doan. This is Uncommon Sense with Junia. Thank you so much for joining us today as I interview Carol Churchill. She is president of Mid-Michigan Community College, a place of 7,000 students across 3 counties, Harrison, Gladwin, and Isabella. She has earned 2 degrees from Western Michigan, an MA in Educational Leadership with an emphasis on human development, and a BA in English. And I was also very impressed about the family farm. For 25 years, you and your husband ran to have a small one. That always speaks of really a sense of responsibility. Anyway, what is the role of what is the responsibility of a college president today in your world?
I like that you ask that. Students ask me that all the time, actually. I think that the biggest role we have is setting the vision for the college and helping motivate people to want to achieve the goals that the community and our important stakeholders have set for us. That's probably the biggest role. I think the role of the college president has certainly changed over the last decade, though. We find more that presidents are coming out of non-traditional paths. It used to be that a president would work their way through an academic path to the presidency, and while that is still traditional, it's changed somewhat, and my path certainly was not that route.
What in your path prepared you to be a president? What did you draw on? What experiences?
You know, I have called myself the accidental president, Junia, to be very honest. I was not one of those people who said, as I started my college career, my goal is to be the president of an institution. When you think back to the time that I was in my childhood, one-room schoolhouse, in a farming community, there certainly weren't great aspirations for a female to even go to college. And so I think throughout my life what I've always done is I've taken a lot of role modeling from my father, who was a visionary for his time. And I think I've always seen that there's one more thing I could do, one more thing I could attempt. I was never satisfied to just let the status quo be in effect. And so I think that's what led me.
What about your father was so empowering, as they say now, or was such a model of encouragement?
Yeah, I've used the phrase oftentimes at the college as I'm speaking to various groups. He had a phrase that really characterized him, and it was, "We can make it work." And it's a short phrase, but it encompasses the idea of collaboration. It encompasses the idea of a work ethic. It encompasses the idea of accepting challenges and not being afraid to fail. So I think that when you're raised with that kind of a mantra, you begin to just absorb it.
Is that something for others that it's difficult for them to learn if they haven't had that at home?
I would imagine it would be. I'm thankful every day for the upbringing I had, and I know that a lot of people don't have that foundation and have to acquire it on their own. And so I think it's a big privilege.
And so what were the first steps that you took from that one-room schoolhouse?
Completing my education, I actually am a community college graduate.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I graduated from a college that's just about as old as Mid-Michigan College, so if you do the numbers, you'll figure everything out there. But and actually went on to be a farm wife after I graduated from the community college. Was on the farm with my husband for many years, but saw that there would be a need for me to do more, to do something that was my own, and so went back to college. So education has just been such an important part of my life. It's opened doors continuously. And I think having my first experience as a college administrator be one where I had a lot of ability, I was empowered to do things, to take risks.
How did that happen?
Because I worked in an environment where my immediate supervisor felt that was appropriate, where the president was certainly willing to listen to new ideas. The president didn't appear to be afraid of youth and maybe doing things in a different way. And so it gave me an opportunity to try some new things. I actually went to that college where I had graduated from, was where I became an administrator. And I was an administrator there for 15 years, going back after I had completed my degrees as a non-traditional student. And so it felt like coming home. It felt like the right place. And I always appreciate that opportunity.
Now, you've been in Michigan 5 years, the fifth president.
Yeah.
And in that time, you have revamped college understanding of goals, right?
Yes.
The emphasis on student, employee, community, and institution. How do you employ that goal in the course of being president? What do you tell your various colleagues or the students?
I think the first thing about those goals is simply that they weren't my goals. Mm-hmm. They were goals that were created after doing a lot of strategic planning in which we engaged our communities, we engaged students, we engaged our faculty and our staff. And so they were jointly shared goals of the things that we felt were important for the institution. I think in the everyday operation of the college, the goals are very useful in determining operational things such as budgets, resources, those kinds of things. Very useful in explaining to students and the community the direction in which we're going. So they have an operational aspect to them. There are action plans connected to every one of those goals. A part of it is also our continuous quality improvement, where we're not satisfied.
You can do that in a school?
You certainly can.
Give me an example.
Well, it's our means of accreditation.
I see what you mean.
Yes, and so we put it into practice, and we're certainly striving very hard to drive that throughout the culture so that every person in the college, no matter what their position may be, is constantly looking at their procedures, their processes, their everyday workflow, and saying, how can I make this better to make my job more satisfying and to serve our constituents in a better way?
Mm. You know, before we were visiting, and you had this great line that grades were not negotiable, which is true. You have to earn them, and they are really a review of the work you've done. What do students expect by way of grading that brought that comment out of you?
I'm certainly, it rose to the surface just because of some recent events from students, but I think it is more a statement that signifies a change in how generations interact. We have a different generation from my generation. In my generation, certainly if a professor gave you a grade, that was the grade. And you would never have thought of picking up the phone and calling the president and saying, this grade is not acceptable. But that can happen and does happen in real life in these times. Not that it's a bad thing, but it sort of signifies that instead of it being an absolute in classrooms, students now think that most things are something that should be negotiated. And so you do get questions about that. It's simply a different way of interacting. And we serve a tremendous number of first-generation students who perhaps have not experienced anything in the way of higher education prior to coming to us. They don't always understand that there are appropriate channels for resolving problems. And so sometimes those questions are what's at the other end of a phone call to my office.
It's so interesting that everything is now negotiable. What other areas do you notice that in?
Well, I think you sort of see it throughout differences in child rearing practices, all kinds of things. I mean, there's a difference between the absolutes that we were used to in our childhoods. You knew the rules and you wouldn't think of transgressing them without a consequence. And I think now things are more, there's a lot more discussion about it. There's a lot more indirect means of motivating rather than a rule. It's a different approach to interpersonal relationships than most of us experienced in formal settings in our childhood.
Well, I'm in your boat, but what did you have to learn?
I think you have to learn a lot because it's not only the students that are coming to us, it's certainly young employees too. I think that there's a lot of healthiness around much of what I'm talking about because it does open up things more for people to express their opinions and their ideas. Certainly ideas that come from many people are better than ideas that come from a few. So there are good parts to all of that. But it's, in my leadership as a president, I am leading in a far different way than the presidents under whom I served, for the most part.
It's changed that fast?
It has. Some of it is the generational thing. I think a part of it may be the gender thing. I think that females tend to, in many situations, react in different ways. Perhaps we are by nature, and this is such a generalization, but we may be more collaborative just as a result of having been mothers and nurturers and so on.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a different skill set, not better, not worse. It's a different skill set that we may bring to these roles.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So what gives you pleasure?
Ooh, I love to golf.
Yeah, do you?
I do. I enjoy reading very much. Anything outdoors. I really enjoy the outdoors, except when it becomes sub-zero.
And that's how you renew?
It is, very much so. To get away from things. And I find that when I'm away from my desk and outdoors is when problems tend to resolve themselves in my mind. Because you distance yourself and you begin to get a clarity that you don't when you're just focusing on only that issue.
You know, it seems that institutions have different personalities, but the old style or the current style used to be to work all out. That was rewarded, that was understood. You needed to do it because the responsibilities were wide and deep. The newer thing seems to come in is family and work balance, life balance, and therefore you have to leave, you don't work weekends or however it plays out. Do you have any experience with both of those?
I do. I always tell my employees that when they have family emergencies and family needs, that those things have to be their priorities, and they need to set their own priorities around that. However, I do come from a farming family. I grew up on a farm with 5 brothers. And so my work ethic is one where I demand a lot of myself. I put in long hours, and it energizes me to do that. And so I have to remember that that's not true for everyone. And also I have the luxury right now of my spouse travels, and so he's not obligated to a lot of the evening engagements that I choose to attend. I have a lot more freedom than a lot of people that might be in a similar situation. And so I have to remind myself of that other people still do have young children or elderly parents they're caring for or whatever, and that those need to be priorities in their lives too. So I fully recognize and appreciate that.
You know, it seems to me the hardest part of work is the human personalities. What have you learned in your classes and in life that you could share with us that talks about how do you get along with people or keep relationships solid?
We do have a lot of employees. At any given time, counting all of our part-time, there may be 500 in a year. And so at any given time, there is likely to be some type of interpersonal issue. And I think they're the very hardest thing for me, because I don't see black and white. I see shades of gray. I know that each person is seeing an issue from their own perspective, and I can empathize normally with every side. And so trying to incentivize and motivate people to get along, I think, is trying to reach that common ground where people can see that even though in the beginning they feel they're in opposition, there really are commonalities in almost every situation that you can build on.
How do you deal with manipulative employees or people?
I'm pretty fortunate to not have a good example of that because I haven't experienced it in quite some time. And maybe it's because I like to make it very clear that what you see is what you get. I cherish honesty, and I think people tend to see that in me. I hope they do. And so it almost feels like an uneven playing field for someone to try to be manipulative. And I don't feel that I'm experiencing that. I also bring to this position a lot of years of experience in the workplace. You know, after you've been doing this sort of thing for nearly 25 years, you've encountered all kinds of people. And so I think that with time, you do learn when someone is trying to manipulate you, and you're pretty attuned to that.
I have seen really like one or two people. One would try to upend an organization by, collusion and, making things. And it's always, I wondered how you really deal with it. Does that person need to go? Can that person learn through talk? And I'm not running an organization, so I don't have to know, but I would imagine that's.
Well, I do believe in accountability and certainly performance reviews with people talking freely and honestly with their supervisor, people getting second chances unless something is so egregious that it can have a second chance. But I think that remembering the whole idea of how the organization fits together. We are, at the end of the day, no matter how we try to position ourselves, we're a bureaucratic organization. Education is.
Yes.
And so I think we also have to realize that some of the tensions you may feel in a large organization aren't really at their core personally motivated. People tend to want to advocate for their area of interest and their area of accountability.
Interesting, yeah.
And so sometimes there's a natural tension built in that at the end of the day, I would like to say is most often a healthy tension, because you have the various constituents who are saying, this is important for the student. No, this is important for the student. And everyone talking about the student's needs from a slightly different angle. And if you can bring that group together, then you really are serving the student in the very best way, because all parameters of their needs are being discussed. So the trick is to keep it impersonal and based on the problem and not people.
Now that is a wonderful gift.
I don't know if I always have it. It's a goal, though.
Yes. No. But it is
a goal.
That takes down a lot of energy from up here to more normal. You were talking when we were setting up about working with the local businesses to find out exactly what they want so that you can have programs that will teach students, interested students, what they need to do. Does that encompass all parts of it, like how to dress or how to treat your supervisor, or what technically you need to do, or what are some of the programs I don't mean programs, but what's involved in making that student ready? Or hireable?
Several things. There are, at the core, there are the fundamentals in your liberal arts, in your sciences and math, your general education, that teach students things like critical thinking and their oral and written communication skills that they're going to need no matter what walk of life they're in.
Yeah.
So those are sort of the core of building that student competency. And then as you begin to look along the career path, certainly those technical skills or whatever professional skills they need are extremely important and are built into the curriculum. We continue to hear from employers constantly, and this has not changed in nearly 25 years in higher education, that the soft skills are still such important elements. And those get to things like work ethic, punctuality, appropriate communication, appropriate conduct, all of those kinds of things. And admittedly, those are more difficult to teach. But we like to think that in many, many of our programs, the students learn the theory in the classroom, and then they have an opportunity to go into a simulated setting, either in a laboratory, a nursing skills lab, a physical therapy assistance lab, whatever. It simulates the real world, and they practice what they've learned. And when you create an environment that feels like their future workplace and where they're treated as a professional that they will eventually become, those soft skills seem to follow quite well. And it's a model that's proven very well for mid, a model that we're building into our new buildings as we create them.
They used to talk about owning a job. If people really cared about what they were doing, they not only did it better and more consistently, work ethic, but it was more satisfying to them rather than I'm just here for the pay, or I'm really unhappy with a lot of the stuff around me. I know that's probably part of how you see things, but really, what is work ethic as it is being taught today?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if there is a consistent theme to a work ethic that's being taught today. The workplace has changed tremendously. We are so fortunate at Mid that we have many longtime employees that are very loyal to the institution, and they're really the backbone of our organization. But certainly the new generation is much more accustomed to holding a job for a short period of time, relatively short, moving on to the next opportunity. They're not averse to moving to create new opportunities for themselves. So the new work ethic, it is about a number of things that are at the core: punctuality, professionalism, all of those kinds of things. But I think that there's an overlay of flexibility in that too. How can you be flexible? How can you remain a lifelong learner? How can you bring your own energy to your job and your own creativity to make it more satisfying? Some of those are components that I think have changed much.
One of the things I've noticed that someone I admire very much does, when she is about to initiate something, she will consider it from every person's point of view in the organization and improve it so that that person's experience might be enhanced, even if nothing happens, just so there's questions. So you really have confidence in her that she is thinking of every participant in advance. I was just really taken with that, because our culture is not introspective very much. We don't pause and be quiet and really listen, and then after listening, think over what people have just said, and therefore you have more to comment on because you just heard it and thought about it. And so she's one of the rare people, because a lot is just, oh, let's do it, boom. And for longer term things, I mean, I do that sometimes. I don't like it.
I was just going to say, I'd like to meet her.
Yeah.
I'm sure that she's someone I could learn from, because that's a real trick. And I am much more myself by personality, action oriented.
Yes.
And I know that about myself. And that reflectiveness is something that has to happen. So she has the right key there, I'm sure.
And I think at some things, do you see yourself as number one, or do you see yourself as making number one better? Number two. It just.
I do not by any means see myself as number one. I am so fortunate to have talented employees surrounding me who are also very interested in the college advancing.
That is just a wonderful attitude to have. Well, we need to conclude, and I would just like to ask one fast question. When you get afraid of something, people talk about outside their comfort zone, all the time. How do you get yourself to do it?
I think just diving in and doing it. I remember the very first time someone pointed to me in the college education and said, and this is our professional, our expert in this field. And I realized they were talking about me. And I thought, well, then apparently I better learn to be one. So I think it's just diving in, overcoming your fears, and not failing.
We have had a wonderful conversation, and I have learned a lot, and I hope you have as well. First of all, it's very helpful to have just a sense of what's next. She learned a lot from her father, who said, we can get this done, just responsibility, action, risk. She developed the importance of education. Her first jobs were around an environment she did. She brought a lot of that farming responsibility to her jobs wherever they were. She is very good at adjusting to change, as in we talked about grades, and the students now feel that everything is negotiable, and so you have to kind of get with the culture even though the grades aren't negotiable. And the idea of taking risks, that you kind of step into things regardless, and that you don't see yourself as number one. You see yourself as the empowerer of the project, bringing everybody in so they can be successful, satisfied, joyous, and thrilled to be working with you and alive. Thank you so much.
To contact Junia, send her an email at info@juniadone.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadone.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time for Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan.